In Sri Lanka, I was involved in trying to help at different levels. At one level, I was involved in several mediation initiatives between the leaderships of the government and different groups. And then at another level, we were trying to work with individuals at the grassroots level. And also we were trying to address some of the sort of the fallout of the conflicts. So we were helping with rehabilitation and providing medical treatment, that kind of thing. Well, the situation in Sri Lanka was different from Thailand, of course, but maybe the similar thing is that these situations are very complicated, very complex, and to be a peacemaker in such a situation actually is quite difficult, and it's easy to get despondent and depressed. And the reason is that actually there are so many things happening. At different levels, there are things coming from the past, injustices in the past that have never been corrected and have ended up in sort of structural violence. And then there are the way the different leaderships of the different groups that are fighting, the way they are thinking and the way they strategize. And then of course there's the thinking and the emotion of ordinary people, and they're in different groups. And it all ends up in a really difficult, complex situation. Anyway, the frustration with the actual peacemaking was that it would take quite a long time to make a few steps forward. And then there would be some act of violence that would suddenly put everything back, 4 steps. And that was really difficult to work with. But I ended up thinking that if I focused on achievement, then I would always be saddened and disappointed. But if I don't focus on achievement, if I focus on what is the best thing to do now, then actually there always is something you can do. Okay? And the model I sort of thought of, you might laugh at this, but the model I sort of thought of at the time was, it's rather like a large kitchen and there are too many cooks and they all have different ideas about how the soup should be, and they're all putting in different things. Okay? Now if I expect the perfect consommé soup or perfect soup at the end, I will be disappointed. But if I look at what the other cooks are doing, and if I make the best contribution I can now, then actually that is the best for now. I don't know about the result, but at least I am making a good contribution now. And I think actually in the situation of peacemakers in Thailand, that's really what that's an appropriate way to think. So don't think you should be able to get your goal. Rather look at what's happening and what's possible and what you can do now to contribute to the goal. And then from a Buddhist point of view, a lot of the problem has to do with people's consciousness. So actually people see enemies, whether Sri Lanka or Thailand. When we're in this situation, people think about themselves and their movement, and they think about the others and their movement, and they understand it all in a certain way. They project enemies, they begin to see themselves as the good side, and the others as the bad side, and actually, in reality, our enemy is lobha, dosa, and moha. Lobha, dosa, and moha, the akusala mula, greed, hate, and delusion. And from a Buddhist perspective, actually, when we make peace, it's really about trying to overcome those. And they are difficult to deal with, especially in conflict. They're difficult to deal with in life anyway, but especially in conflict because they interact with each other, both within ourselves and also between different individuals and different groups. And so you get a really large, gross dynamic of lobha, dosa, moha that is beyond the control of anyone. And this is why, as a peacemaker particularly, it seems so difficult and maybe it may seem hopeless to intervene. But actually, you can work with lobha, dosa, moha. And since the other levels of the conflict also are based on lobha, dosa, moha, then you can also work with those. And maybe the sort of secret of peacemaking in this kind of situation is to think of it as a complex situation, and we need to make responses at different levels, right? If we just think of one level, it's obviously not adequate, so we need to think of different levels. And the level that has to be there is within yourself. And that might seem a bit unrealistic when all this is happening round about, and why bother about sitting down and looking at yourself? But actually, what is happening in your mind-body is really, that's the one thing you can have an influence over directly. If you're skilled, if you're aware and skilled, that's the one thing you can have an influence over. And then everything else comes later. Okay, so a practice that lets you get to know the lobha, dosa, and moha that is there and deal with it on a day-to-day basis, that is, to my understanding, essential to being a peacemaker. Because the unpeace is about lobha, dosa, moha. In order to make headway with peace, we've got to have, instead of moha, we've got to have a clear understanding, not self-centered. Instead of dosa, we've got to have metta. Instead of lobha, greed, we've got to have a willingness to look at the needs of all sides. So at one level, the level of practice, we need to engage with the whole process as it is taking place in us, right? There wouldn't be a large-scale conflict if it wasn't for something taking place in the individuals in Thailand or Sri Lanka or wherever, okay? And there won't be any peace made unless something happens in the hearts of individuals. So the only place we can start is with us, and then we work from there. And then, of course, there are other levels, depending on our connections, depending on what influence we have. So a broad divide, there is an approach that works with the leaders and with their perceptions and tries to find some common ground and at least decide, make decisions about how particular problems are our situations are faced, and that's creating dialogue and mediation. But then also, very importantly, there's work at a grassroots level, which and I think you've been doing both actually. Your East team have been doing both, and both of those are important. And it might seem as if it's a drop in the ocean, and yes, when there's such a big sort of clash taking place, it is. But still, it's important, and all initiatives to change things are important. They can grow, especially as as people realize the cost of the conflict that is taking place, and then peace initiatives can